The CEO laughed when I warned him the acquisition contract had a loophole. "You're a secretary, not a lawyer," he said. I nodded. "And bought the rights myself for $1 through that loophole." When they tried to close the $90 million deal, they were shocked, because that deal. I still remember the exact moment like a freeze frame in my mind. I was standing at the end of the long mahogany conference table, carefully placing a fresh set of acquisition documents into leather binders. The room smelled of polished wood, expensive cologne, and power. The CEO, Nathan Carlisle, the man who ran our multinational firm, like his personal empire, leaned back in his chair, flashing that signature smug grin. "Mandy," he said, like my name was a punchline. "You're a secretary, not a lawyer. Maybe stick to stapling things, huh?" A few of the executives chuckled. I felt the heat crawl up my neck, but I said nothing. I simply nodded and set the binder down in front of him. I had been at Carlisle Holdings for 8 years. I started as an admin assistant, but over time, I became something else entirely, the unofficial fixer, the quiet one in the room who remembered every clause, every date, every clause buried on page 47 of a 500-page contract. But none of that mattered to Nathan. In his eyes, I was furniture useful, silent, and invisible. The meeting was about the company's biggest acquisition yet, buying out a European logistics firm valued at $90 million. Everyone around the table was practically vibrating with excitement. The deal was set to close in a week, and Nathan, of course, would take all the credit. But as I handed him the contract draft for final review, I couldn't ignore the knot tightening in my chest. "There's something in here you might want legal to double-check," I said, quietly tapping a section near the back. Nathan barely glanced at it. I said, "Leave it." I looked him in the eye. "It's a loophole, page 312, subsection D. It technically allows third-party purchase rights under dormant license clauses." Nathan scoffed, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Mandy, please. I have 3 Ivy League lawyers working on this. If they're not worried, I'm not worried, and I don't pay you to think." The room fell silent. Some smirked. Some looked away. I nodded again, "Understood, sir," but inside, something shifted. For years I had accepted the condescending comments, the subtle digs, the glass ceiling pressed firmly against my head. I told myself, it was the price of staying in the game, but this moment, this was different. This wasn't just arrogance, it was negligence, and I wasn't going to let it slide. That night, I stayed late at the office under the pretense of preparing meeting notes. The cleaning crew passed by without a second glance. After all, Mandy, the secretary, was always there, always invisible. But I wasn't preparing notes. I was reading carefully every clause, every footnote, every cross-reference of that acquisition contract, and what I found chilled me. The dormant license clause was real and legal. It allowed a third party to assume licensing rights if they paid a nominal fee and submitted a claim before the acquisition officially closed. The price $1. It was a clause designed for emergencies never meant to be triggered. But it hadn't been removed, and no one else had noticed. I stared at the legal print long after midnight. My hands trembled, but not with fear, with something sharper, stronger. For the first time I realized the real power wasn't with the people at the boardroom table, it was with the people who understood the fine print. I made a decision that night, a decision that would change everything, but I wasn't reckless and I wasn't naive. I knew I'd need a plan and, more importantly, timing, because the clock on the acquisition was ticking, and Nathan Carlisle had no idea that by the time they tried to close their $90 million deal, I'd already be the legal owner of exactly what they were trying to buy. The next morning, the office hummed with its usual rhythm, coffee brewing, keyboards clacking, small talk flowing like white noise. I sat at my desk outside the executive suite reviewing emails. On the surface, I looked exactly like what they thought I was, the quiet secretary who didn't make waves, but under my blazer, folded neatly in my bag, sat a signed check for $1, and a printed claim form I had called in a favor from an old college friend who worked in corporate compliance. She confirmed what I had read: the dormant license clause was binding. Absurd, yes, but binding. It had been left in the original acquisition papers from 20 years ago and carried over with every ownership change. Right, and according to international trade law, if someone submitted a formal claim and payment before a merger's finalization, that person could assume the licensing rights of the company's core logistics software. Without that license, the acquisition would collapse. I wasn't a lawyer, but I didn't need to be. I just needed to follow the rules exactly as they were written. At 12:47 p.m. during lunch break, I walked to a nearby notary office. I signed the form, paid the filing fee, and submitted the claim legally, transparently, and with every document in order. I paid the $1 in cash. The notary, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes, glanced at the figure and smirked. "Hope this works out for you," she said. I smiled back, "Me too." By the time I returned to the office, nothing seemed different. Nathan's assistant was gossiping with marketing. The CFO was on a call laughing about golf. Nathan himself was barking at someone about synergy on the other side of the glass wall. I sat down and typed a brief summary of my filing, sending it to my personal email for safekeeping. The clock ticked. Nothing happened for 2 days. I started to wonder if I had imagined it all, if maybe I had misunderstood some legal technicality. I had risked my job, my career, maybe even a lawsuit. But on the morning of the 3rd day, I noticed a shift. At 9:15 a.m., a lawyer from the acquisition firm stormed into Nathan's office. They spoke in low, clipped tones. Nathan's voice rose once a sharp bark before dropping again. By noon, the legal team was huddled in the executive boardroom. At 1:30 p.m., Nathan summoned the entire leadership team for an urgent update. I wasn't invited, but I didn't need to be. I heard enough as people whispered in hallways, snippets of conversations that floated my way, some loophole claim. Who the hell filed it? The license is frozen. The deal can't close without it. I kept my head down, pretending not to listen. That afternoon, Nathan walked past my desk without looking at me. The man who had smirked at me 3 days earlier didn't smirk anymore. I went home that night with my heart pounding, not out of fear, out of something else, a strange mixture of disbelief and calm. It was working. But this wasn't over, because I knew men like Nathan Carlisle didn't fold quietly.